Welcome to the Wooper Club League Season 13, Week 1 Power Rankings. We are back. I'm your host, IllLogic, coach of the Buffalo Bouffalant. As always, thank you for joining me again this season. It is SteveChuck, coach of the Waterdeep Wobbuffets.
Glad to be back.
And with a new format and everything that we detailed in the draft breakdown, if you have not checked out the draft breakdown, go do that, because boy, do we have a lot of different rules and such. We got a big old auction system, so we've got quite a bit to go through. Let's dive into it. Before we even get into the auction, there was something very important that went down before we got even any finalities in the auction, and that was our very first trade of the season. We hinted at it a little bit in the draft breakdown, but here we go. The Route 1 Burbs building up a Sun team without the Torkoal. No longer. Here is the Torkoal, and in exchange they will give up a Tier 3 of their own, the Hisuian Decidui, as well as 8 Woot Bucks, plus the promise not to bring Sun in this matchup against the Agrons. Steve, this was pretty interesting. I think we need to remember this is a trade that the Agrons did not need to make. Obviously, it makes a ton of sense for the Burbs. Do you think the Agrons shortchanged themselves, or were some of these unique conditions along with the one-for-one trade enough to potentially break even or come ahead for the Agrons?
I really think the Agrons could have certainly got more. As you mentioned, they didn't need to make this trade. Torkoal is still a pretty good piece defensively, has a good defense stat, able to clear hazards, able to set hazards, able to pick up burns. It can certainly serve a utility piece without being that core sunsetter. But with that option, of course, the Burbs were very interested in it, and were able to give up a good amount. But I feel they could have pushed for a little more. Probably got more Woot Bucks. Maybe could have gotten a tier 2 instead. Of course, a tier 2 would have had to wait until the Burbs picked up a different tier 2 so that they had a tier 2 to trade away. And then with regards to the Sun, I do believe the trade specified not bring Drought, not Sun, which does leave open the option for the Burbs, who have done it in the past, to bring manual Sun and abuse it that way. So still a lot of options for the Burbs. It's a great trade for the Burbs, able to get that key piece they needed. And for 8 Woot Bucks, which is, as you'll see in the auctions, roughly the price of one Pokemon-ish, pretty good deal for them.
I think that's probably the big one. I think this deal is really interesting, really neat, being able to add in a couple extra elements. I do agree, maybe a few extra root bucks would have been a little more appropriate. We'll kind of see maybe what Joey ends up doing with the Hisuian Decidui. Maybe that ends up being a key piece and we're just wrong about it. It could abuse Terra decently well, but we'll have to see. With that said, the auctions have, of course, finished for Week 1. Let's take a look at who got what and how some of these teams ended up changing. Here we go. We're just going in the draft order. Route 1 Burbs, off the bat, able to get the Tier 3 Muck for 8 Woot Bucks and the Tier 4 Arbolifa for 6. Music City Mudkips grabbing the Tier 2 Hoopa for an astonishing 17 Woot Bucks. Wooper Troopers making a couple smaller adds, the Braviary for 3 from Tier 4 and the Phalanx for 2 from Tier 5. 2 of the months that I got in my very first auction draft. A lot of memories there. And Seattle Steamrollers coming out really big with the 17 for the Tier 3 cycles, are eager to get the Hazard Remover. Boulder Boulders with a ton of moves here. The Tier 1 King Gambit for 15, Tier 4 Articuno for 9, and Tier 5 Houndoom for 5. Some fun battles in all of those. The Corviknight Clobbers with a ton of different moves here too. The Tier 2 Galar Slowbro for 10, the Tier 4 Bruxish for 4, and the Tier 2 Cloth for 2. Both of those grabbed away from me. Illyria Electabuzz staying pat at least for now. Not able to get anything at the end there. The Kanto Kinglers more than made up for some of that action. 25 for the Tier 1 Zapdos. That's a pretty interesting one there. Cincinnati Incineroar staying a little quiet, getting their old pal Wigglytuff from Tier 5 for 3 Woot Bucks. Moving on, the Newport Noctilles grabbing the Tier 4 Houndstone for 15. No last respects. Is it worth 15? We'll talk about that. The Akron Agrons picking up a couple of Tier 3s to complement what they already got, using some of their extra Root Bucks. 14 for Tinkaton and 16 for the Paldean Tauros Blaze Form. Calgary Corviknights picking up a couple of mods. Breloom Tier 2 for 12, and the Tier 3 Dreadnought for 11. My Buffalo Bouffalant able to pick up a couple of mods. The Tier 2 Sandy Shocks for 11. The Tier 5 Grumpig for 1. A little bit of an interesting spicy pick there. And your Waterdeep Wobbuffets, Steve, not coming away with anything after the first week. There are a lot of mons here to go through, of course, but there are, I think, a few interesting storylines sprinkled throughout here. So, Steve, why don't you guide us on the story of what all happened in Week 1 and what some of the standouts were?
Yeah, I'll quickly first mention the mons that were not picked up in this auction, starting with a Landorus Sandforce. As a note, there was a little bit of a misunderstanding and miscommunication as that Pokemon was translated and put into the auction. with the misunderstanding, we decided to void the auction after its conclusion. So no one won it this week. Any Woot bucks that were originally spent on it were refunded, and it will be added to week 2. So you'll see that extra tier 1 available in our recap next week. Additionally, there were a couple of tier 5s that no one decided to pick up: the Calrex, Slacking, and Lechonk. So with that, there are a couple notable things. In terms of high spending, you can see the Zapdos at 25 as kind of the biggest standout there. The Zapdos was a very fierce battle going back and forth for a while until the Kinglers just were trying to convince no one else to even consider it, throwing out greater and greater bids until it got all the way up to 25. They did win it, though, so it worked. Additionally, though, the CL Steamroller started off with a similar strategy, bidding 12 off the rip for Cyclozar, which really did help them secure it for a while. No one else bid on Cyclozar until towards the end, when some of these other Pokemon really started getting into the similar values. Then those 12 for Cyclozar started to look a lot more reasonable, and some other coaches, being, I believe, myself, decided to bid a little bit on it. Ended up the Steamrollers did secure it, but they did have to pay a little more than the 12 they initially bid. A big story here in general is how much the tier 3s were going for. Outside of the Cyclozar we talked about, the Agrons and Wobbuffets, as well as, I believe, the Clobberers bidding on the Tinkaton and Tauros Blaze, bringing those up to 14, 16, and Cyclozar at 17. Really high totals here for tier 3s. In general, going for more than the tier 2s, where besides Hoopa, going for 10, 11, 12. A little bit interesting. I know, looking at the overall math of everything, every coach is able to pick up from the auction one more tier 1, one more tier 2, and 2 more tier 3s to max out their tiers allowed on their team. With that math, it takes the longest for every coach to pick up the tier 3s with how many are available every week, but still spending so much more on them might not be worth it. We'll certainly like to see what the Agrons especially do with the 2 they picked up spending so much for. A couple steals here. We definitely want to shout out the Muckalola going to the Burbs at 8. Great Pokemon, bulky, hits pretty good, and considering how much the other tier 3s went for, spending only 8 for it is really good. In that same vein, a lot of the tiers 2s going pretty cheaply as well. I'll go with the Slowbro Galar, the cheapest of them, going for 10. You still get a fantastic Mon that admittedly would kind of expect it to be slept on a little bit, and was slightly, but not really to the extent I was expecting. I thought it would end up going for less, with less people being interested. But it did end up having some cost. Something else to note is the Houndstone in Tier 4 going for 15. The Noctowls really wanted this piece for something. I'm excited to see what it is, and if they end up regretting this pick. It was a lot of points. 15, one of the most expensive mons of the week, going for just as much as King Gambit in Tier 1. More than most of the Tier 2s. Kind of the average of the Tier 3s, but for a Tier 4 mon, maybe the Noctowl will see something in Houndstone we didn't, but seems like a lot. Does anything else stand out to you that you'd like to talk about, Nate?
Yeah, those are definitely the main ones. Kind of cool to see some of those lower mons picked up for onesie, twosies here. The Grumpig for 1, the Cloth for 2, Phalanx for 2, Braviary for 3. Not standout pieces necessarily, but I think it could be really interesting to see what those small additions throughout the season end up doing for those teams. If these are just going to be temporary pickup pieces just to try and round out the team for now, or if they're going to be staples throughout a lot of cool months that we don't get the chance to see, even if it's just for a couple of points. Eager to see what kind of impact they might make. With that all said, we've got some matches to go through, so let's get to them. We're going in order of their completion, so here we go. We are starting off hot. We got the early match, which allowed our very own Incineroar to head over to Japan for Worlds. They're squaring off in the Corviknight Clobberers' first main league match as the opener. The Clobberers take it 4-0. Turn 1, they trade rocks, but Stone Axe also takes 79% from the tough. Shows the power of these new moves from these new mons from Legends Arceus. Iron Treads clears rocks at least, and then sets up the manual electric terrain, but it'll take 68 from Eel's Flamethrower for its troubles, then Volt out to Quagsire for the second. Matt, ignoring possible grass moves, name a more iconic duo. Toxic hits the Eel, but Giga Drain claims the first KO of the season. Cork Drive boosts Iron Leaf's attack, but the health recovered from Giga Train helps it survive on 8, and U-turn out for over 2/3, activating Palafin's ability while switching out. Wugtrio then sacked the next U-turn from Cleavor, then Veluza sacked the Iron Leafs in the second to last turn of Electric Terrain. Palafin in on Quillfish, and he's hitting the gym, clicking Bulk up on the second bar barrage, lands the poison, but Wave Crash at +2 is enough for the KO. Jet Punch for Wiggly, Jet Punch for Dreads, and with 4% left, Jet Punch also claims the last 29 on Iron Horse. 4 KOs for Palafin on the 4-0 win with the Betrayal from Palafin. Next match is a rematch of a classic from last season. It's the Akron Agrons taking on the newly rebranded Calgary Corviknight, the former Quiet Majesty taking it with another 4-0. Couple of turns setting up T-Spikes with Overcoil wasted as Scizor comes back out and defogs on Tauros. The Agrons strike first with a couple Iron Heads on Diancie after a Trailblaze. They poised to sweep, hold the phone. Regidrago Dragon Dances on Protect and gets another on the switch out. Galar Articuno down, Hisui and Decidueye down. Tinkaton tears into Fairy to lose the ground weakness and still takes 82%. And down goes Tinkaton. Player F only did 98%. Earthquake finishes that. Outrage finishes Overquill after the Intimidate, then over half to Tauros after another Intimidate before it finally goes down. However, and in comes Dreadnought, Terra Flying, Shell Smash, a Terra Blast, Liquidation, take care of Meowscarada and Tauros. Clean match from Greg. Next match, another rematch of a fun match from Paldea last season. The Newport Noctows once again taking down the Boulder Boulders. This one, a narrow 2-0. Does not start off in Jimmy's favor as the Boulders get up rocks on a missed Draco Meteor. Then Articuno takes the next and roosts on a missed Rock Slide. Can it get any worse? Some positioning battling and Houndstone with a missed Willow. To Jimmy's credit, he hasn't exactly lost much positioning from this so far, but that's rough, buddy. That gets the Boulders a little more chip and a layer of spikes, but Jimmy does get his own rocks up solid and punishing the Spiky Shield with an Encore as well. Mesprit putting in work. The Noctowl's doing a good job putting pressure on the Boulders. The helmet on Houndstone getting even more chip on the Great Tusk, but Houndstone is in hazards range. His Chestnut gets the last 2 layers of spikes up. Ouch. Houndstone is sacked, but Mesprit able to get the Psychic off. It kept in its back pocket for quite a while. But in comes Azelf for the Pixie Battle. Shadow Ball brings Mesprit low, and U-turn brings Azelf to half. And Proc's Weakness Policy. Great call on the Azelf. Kudra's remaining health is sapped by Drain Punch. Ursaluna down to Grass Knot. Great position for the Boulders. However, in comes Vaporeon with the Terra Dragon, and it's wishing, protecting, and finally Calm Minding. Great Terra choices. Azelf does not have a stab to be able to help break through. It gets to +2/+2 before Sasbo switches out. It's going to be Tusk to spin away the rocks. It goes down to Surf and brings in Flareon. What's the play? Terra normal, Trailblaze for a speed boost, and Flame Orb to activate Guts. Very neat. What will Facade do? 87%, not enough as it goes down to King Gambit finally outspeeds, gets the KO, but now it's starting to look pretty winnable, especially with Combat Tauros in. Bulk up on King Gambit, Trailblaze on the Articuno, and hit with Stone Edge to KO that. Hit 2 more onto Azelf to KO that. There's your luck, we're coming right back to you. All the while, Cudchew, Citrus Berry healing it up, and one final Raging Bull will seal the game for the Noctowls. That was a close one, great match from them. The Noctowl setup will outdo that of the Boulders 2-0. Match 4, Steve Waterdeep Wobbuffets with just the drafted mods taking on the Wooper Troopers. We managed to pull out the 1-0 win. Impressive. This was the only 1-0 of the week and was probably the best game of week 1 anyways, so we'll save the recap on this one for the match of the week. Also on this channel, run by Michael the Route 1 Burbs. Go check it out once you're done here. Next up, Michael and those Route 1 Burbs made it no secret they were freaking out about this matchup, but the newly established Sun team seemed to have no problems here. A relatively painless 2-0 win over the scary Seattle Steamrollers, who just cannot find the win column against the Route 1's finest. Early on, Enamorous gets 2 hits onto Muck to bring it low, but Knockoff into Poison Jab takes care of maybe the biggest threat on the Steamrollers early. Arbalva tanks Basculegion, Cyclozar tanks Arbalva, back to Basculegion on Hyper Voice. Synthesis off the damage, we're getting nowhere. At least you can knock off its berry, and Gallade is in. Torkoal, though, can live 2 Sacred Swords, so it gets up rocks on the Belly Bolt switch, and he gets a cheeky Rain Dance, and goes back to Gallade, who isn't tanking hits with much confidence. However, it gets Torkoal low, and Muck is sacked off. There's the boy, Photosynthesis, Walking Wake. That'll 2-shot the Toad Scroll, and in comes Cyclozar, who hasn't switched moves yet. Arbalva tanks the Draco, and Synthesis back up to full. What a monster. Chip onto Basculegion, and Giga Drain finishes that off. Gallade in again. Psycho Cut on the Terra Ghost does most of its health, but Arbalva still lives. Belly Bolt misses the Muddy Water, but the charged Parabolic Charge will finally take care of Arbalva. Short-lived, though. Walking Wake revenges that. 1 Scarf Cyclozar is Chad's last hope. Draco Meteor takes care of Torkoal, then Terra Fairy to immune the Dragon Pulse from Walking Wake, but at -6 it'll take a miracle, and Typhlosion makes its first appearance, sealing the match for the Burbs 2-0, as Michael is off to a hot start. Finally, the Music City Mudkips and Kanto Kinglers trying to redeem a disappointing season from each, but after a technical error, it's going to be the Kanto Kinglers who are awarded the 5-0 victory, the score at the time. Early on, Zapdos Chunks Heatran, who traps Cresselia with Magma Storm. Taunt after recover may just seal the fate of the Lunar Duck, who is stuck Shadow Balling. Set up rocks, miss Magma Storm, the life of a Heatran. Cresselia is released at a third, and the incoming Landorus dodges Magma Storm 2. Classic. Prediction alert, Rock Tomb on the incoming Staraptor, and the only ground immunity. That means Landau outspeeds after another to KO Staraptor. Very nice. U-turn is going to chunk the Revenging Samurott, whose Razor Shell does KO Cresselia. Unfortunate for no Ceaseless Edge spikes. Mabosstiff, though, is in. The goodest boy in. Hound Claws, tank the hit, heal with the berry, and Trailblaze for the KO. Is that a Dragon Dance Mabosstiff with no Dark Resists left? Enter Hoopa, who... Uh-oh, that's going to be a technical foul. Hoopa is a tier 2, cannot Terra, but does so anyways into a fairy type. That'll be a game loss there. But what else did happen by the end? It tanks a crunch. Mabosstiff actually tanks the Shadow Ball back. They KO each other with the Hoopa Life Orb recoil. Now it's time for Horse. Glastrier takes out Raichu after 2 hits thanks to the Sash. Then Decidueye falls to Avalanche, and even though Heatran KOs, you already know Landorus can finish that off. Well done by the Kinglers. They're awarded a 5-0 victory. Unfortunately, with the Illyria Electabuzz, formerly the Lorraine Liron, unable to get a match to sync up with their work schedule at their new position, the Buffalo Bouffalant will walk with a 3-0 forfeit win, but I think we can at least assume that Crabominable would have gotten at least 5 KOs to take the KO lead by the end of Week 1. And that is what happened in Week 1. A lot of matches to cover every week. We got 7 of them for the most part, but after Week 1, here is what we're looking at for our initial power rankings. So number 1, we got the Newport Noctales. Tough to ever put them anywhere else. 2, the Route 1 Burbs. 3, Waterdeep Wobbuffets. Very impressive wins. Without a match to play yet, the Buffalo Bouffalant will have sitting at 4. The Kettle Creek Corviknight, the Corviknight Clobberers, and the Kanto Kinglers round out the 1 and 0 teams at 5, 6, and 7, with the Seattle Steamrollers, the lone 0 and 1 team we have on this list. Ton to go over, Steve, but it's always tough to start anywhere but the Newport Noctales. Actually, a very fun match that the Noctales had against the Boulders yet again. Jimmy looking just pretty dominant, though, don't you think?
Yeah, looking fantastic. Had a lot of bad luck at the start of the game. A lot of rolls not going his way, but able to stay in a decent position and identify his way out and pick up the win. Definitely showing why he is, at this point, probably the favorite going into and continuing through the seasons. And really no reason to not put him at the number 1.
Yeah, we're still waiting for an L from him for some sort of slip-up before we feel convinced at all to put him down. Maybe if the Bouffalant played their match, would have shown something. Crabominable, of course, getting with the famous 5 KOs there. But without that as evidence, we can't exactly do that yet. So the other 2 very outstanding and impressive wins, I think, for sure. The Burbs taking down the Steamrollers and the Wobbuffets with a sort of crippled roster after not getting able to pick up anything. Or able to walk away with wins there, too. 2 very impressive matches. Obviously didn't go over the Wobbuffets match in too much detail there. But what impressed you about these 2 matches that we were willing to put them at 2 and 3?
So the Burbs really stands out as one thing, and just being against one of the other top 5 teams. Similar to last season, we really haven't changed our stance that we feel the top 5 teams tend to perform just with a little bit of a gap between them and anyone else, that being the Noctowls, Burbs, Wobbuffets, Bouffalant, and Steamrollers. So the Burbs, coming in here against one of the historically top 5 teams and picking up a W really does give them a great start to the season, getting one of those difficult games done and out of the way and kind of catapulting them up here, keeping the number 2, as well as just having a cracked team with the Sun and Walking Wake, having all sorts of options there. So their team is looking in a good spot, and with that, they are up here, and it will take some blunders on their part likely to move them down significantly. The Wobbuffets, I believe the main reason we're here is I was able to pull out the win with as you mentioned, just the 6 months from the auction. It felt like a tough matchup, but able to claw back and pick up a win that was looking quite bad, and keep myself alive for future difficult matchups.
Yeah, it appeared to be weakness policy week. That's a little bit of a hint there. So before we move on, just the 1, 2, 3, 4 that we have here again for those top 5 teams, the Steamrollers making it in there at the bottom. Do you see any potential movement from those 4 teams, or the Steamrollers moving up and down at all before we move on?
Within this week, it's only week one. It's hard to, say for sure anyone has a solid position. I would very much believe those five teams you mentioned will be staying on from week to week and will likely be shifting around slightly. I expect the Noctowls to stay up top, especially considering they'll have what we'll call against a half game up on the Bouffalant with a hard fought win versus the forfeit. Um, and these two are definitely the two that have performed the best historically. So we will certainly see. And it's really a week to week thing. I could definitely see things shuffling up a lot as things go on.
And if we're going to be fair here as well, the 5, 6, and 7 teams are the ones with the widest margins of victory here, all very impressive in their own rights here. Calgary Corviknight picking up probably the most impressive of those wins over the Akron Agrons. Nice grudge match from last time as well, getting revenge for the Terra Rock Bisharp, which was just absolute blast. Corviknight Clobberers again picking up their first win in the main league against the Incineroar. Pretty impressive stuff there overall with utilizing the Palafin. Good positioning all around. The Kanto Kinglers, even though it ended up being a forfeit win 5-0, actually I really liked a lot of their set ideas. We didn't even get to see all of them, but there were a couple ones that really stood out there too. What do you have to say about the 5, 6, and 7 teams, which are actually the 3 currently leading in plus-minus differential?
Yeah, definitely really liked, especially the Calgary Corviknight and the Corviknight Clobbers. So many Corviknights. Both of them, with impressive wins against teams that have done well in the past, picking up some key wins there. And you mentioned the Kinglers. They did great, and even though their opponent, even after their opponent, violated the rules, they were able to push on and win it, playing it out too. So some great stuff there, some great sets. All of these teams are looking good currently, although there are 7 teams that lost this week, 6 not on this list, and all of them are certainly looking. And I would not be surprised to see some of these teams maybe fall and kind of be fighting for those playoff spots as weeks go on.
But wouldn't it be nice to see one of these teams maybe get a couple more wins here in the next couple weeks, start building something up, and instead of a top 5, we start talking about a top 6 or 7? That could be very interesting to see if they can pull anything out. And one last note about the Kinglers, horse. That's I just have to say horse there.
Horse.
And moving on here, that's going to wrap up week 1 and our look at the power rankings. Again, tough to really go too deep into it with only 1 week of evidence so far, but I feel like we came up with a pretty nice list there. This does mean we get to look on to week 2. Auctions from our side are already done. We'll go over those at the beginning of the next video, but boy, do we have some juicy matchups already here in week 2. We've got a couple very interesting ones. Steve, what are you looking at?
So I'll take a look at a couple of 0-1 teams squaring off each other. First off, the Akron Agrons going up against the Cincinnati Incineroar. These are both teams that had good seasons last time, both making it to playoffs, and now both of them starting off this season with a loss, trying to get back and clawing it in at these two 0-1 teams going there. Very similar, but a little bit different, is the Boulder Boulders and Wooper Troopers. Both of them barely missing the playoffs last season, trying to prove themselves this season. Both starting off 0-1 yet again after going up against the Noctowls and Wobbuffets. So some pretty tough opponents, but certainly trying to prove themselves here and pick up that win to go 1-1 and get that much closer to a playoff spot this season.
And of course, if we talk about the 0-1s, we have to talk about a couple of teams that we just went over, some 1-0 teams. I think we can all agree the highlight of this week is the Wobbuffets and the Burbs are 2-3 teams. I imagine picking up a win here would actually put them within striking distance of the Bouffalant and, of course, the number 1 right now, Newport Noctowls. This could be an absolutely huge match. Again, getting some of these high-profile matches out of the way early is kind of nice there, but you don't quite have the filled-out roster this season that you would otherwise, so I wonder which one of these teams can take advantage of that. Maybe, depending on what we get in the auction, could make a big difference. The other one, of course, to highlight, the 2 Corviknight squads, the Calgary Corviknight and the Corviknight Clobberers. We had them at 5 and 6, but this is your chance to start rattling off some wins and getting into that conversation for some of the absolute best teams here. First off, getting a win against a pretty solid team, which we already highlighted in the Agrons and Incineroar, and then being able to beat the other one of you really gives you a leg up here, not just in the power rankings, but for that playoff push, you know you're going to need probably at least 4 wins. Getting a couple to start off right away puts you in an amazing position. We saw what happened with the Summit County Psyducks just last season. They fell off a cliff, but they were still able to hold onto a playoff spot because they had such a strong start. This is your shot for both of these teams to grab an early lead and really get to it. That's going to do it from us here for the Week 1 recap plus power rankings. Thank you for joining me, Steve. Thanks to all of you for joining us. We'll see you back here Week 2, but don't forget to check out the Match of the Week as well, brought to you by the Route 1 Burbs. We'll see you here every week as we go through the Wooper Club League Season 13. See you then.